When you start scrolling through cheap budget gaming rigs, it's almost inevitable to feel that knot in your stomach. Those $500 plus pre-built boxes often promise a smooth 1080p experience. Yet once you plug them in, the performance hiccups start to show up in the first week of gameplay. I've seen friends throw away a month-old system because the frame rates tanked on anything beyond a couple of titles, and that regret really makes you wonder, is there a smarter middle ground that doesn't force you to slash your budget or settle for subpar visuals? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. That's the exact question I asked myself when I pulled the iBUYPOWER Slate Black gaming PC into the test bench and tried to figure out whether it finally bridges that gap between too cheap to be reliable and so expensive you need a loan. First off, let's talk about what you're actually getting here. The machine packs an AMD Ryzen 7 8700F, a solid 8-core processor that, in my real-world testing, handled modern titles like Cyberpunk 2077 and Elden Ring with ease when the graphics were dialed to medium-high settings. Paired with an AMD Radeon RX 6600 8GB GPU, this combination lands you comfortably around 6,070 frames per second at 1080p on most popular games, and even nudges the 1440p mark on less demanding shooters. The 16GB of DDR5 RAM, clocked at 5200 MHz, means you're not going to see stutter when you swap between a game and a browser tab or have a few background streaming apps open. And a 1TB NVMe SSD means load times are practically instantaneous. My Fortnite match started in under 3 seconds, and the same SSD handled a quick install of a fresh copy of Starfield without any lag. These specs sound great on paper, but the real litmus test is how the system performs once you set it up in a typical living room or small home office. I placed the iBUYPOWER on a standard desk with the included RGB keyboard and mouse, and the first thing I noticed was the quietness of the build. The case design incorporates a 3-fan cooling system that keeps the Ryzen processor under 70 degrees even after a marathon 2-hour gaming session. That means you're not constantly hearing fan whirring while you're trying to focus on a tactical shooter or a narrative-driven RPG. The RGB lighting is subtle, not the blaring neon that some cheap rigs use to distract from mediocre internals, and the black chassis stays cool enough that you could safely run it on a carpeted floor without overheating. Now, who should consider buying this desktop? If you're a gamer who wants a solid 1080p to entry-level 1440p experience out of the box, without having to tinker with BIOS settings or upgrade components after a month, this machine is a good fit. It's also a decent pick for streamers who need enough horsepower to handle both gameplay and a simple OBS overlay. 16GB of RAM and the Ryzen 7's multi-core capability keep the stream smooth while the GPU handles the graphics rendering. The included keyboard and mouse add a small convenience factor, especially for those who don't already own a decent gaming peripheral set. Conversely, if you're hunting for ultra-higher fresh 1440p or a true 4K gaming rig, the RX 6600 will feel a bit bottlenecked. The GPU isn't built for maxed-out settings in the most demanding titles, so you'll have to make compromises on texture quality or shadow detail to keep frame rates up. Similarly, users who already have a high-end GPU or a custom-built PC might find the value proposition less attractive, simply because the cost of the slab is comparable to buying a comparable GPU separately and installing it in a case you already own. Also, if you're a hardcore overclocker who likes to push every component to its limits, the stock cooling might not satisfy you and you could end up adding aftermarket fans or a liquid cooler, which adds both expense and effort. Let's dig into some practical strengths that become evident after a few weeks of use. The first is the plug-and-play nature of the package. All the cables are labeled, the power supply is already sized for the components, and Windows 11 Home boots up pre-installed and ready to go. For anyone who isn't comfortable opening a case or installing drivers, that simplicity is a huge win. The second strength is the SSD space. A 1TB NVMe drive gives you ample room for a handful of large modern games, plus your operating system and a media library. In my experience, this prevents the constant need to delete older titles to make room for newer releases, a common pain point with older or cheaper pre-built rigs that ship with a 256GB drive. Finally, The network connectivity includes both Gigabit Ethernet and Wi-Fi 6, so you won't be stuck with a weak wireless signal if your router is across the house. During a LAN-based Valorant session, the ping stayed consistently low, showing that the network hardware isn't a bottleneck. On the flip side, there are a few weaknesses that are worth noting before you click Add to Cart. The case's expansion options are somewhat limited. There's only room for